Hi guys, Korean movie recapped here. Before we start, warning. Spoilers ahead. Today, I'm going to recap a 2017 Korean action thriller movie called Steel Rain. This movie tells the story of a coup in North Korea which forces an agent to escape to the south with the North's injured great leader in an attempt to keep him alive and prevent a nuclear war. So, will he be able to prevent the war? Let's find out together. Is a former North Korean Special Forces agent who has turned into a drug addict. One day, he is summoned by his former commander and is given a secret mission. Commander says that the North Korean government is infested with many persons who want to stage a coup against the North great leader. So, he needs him to eliminate 3 masterminds behind the coup to keep the great leader in charge. After hearing that Commander will take care of his family, agrees to take on the mission. Meanwhile in South Korea, the presidential election is ongoing. Kwak, as a high-ranking member of the presidential staff, closely watches the presidential vote counting and doesn't spend much time with his kids. After congratulating the newly elected president, he turns back to find that his kids have been taken away by his divorced wife. Meanwhile back in the north, has killed 2 of the 3 targets and covered it as a traffic accident. The news reaches the Chinese and the Chinese informs Kwak of the condition. They think that the accident is actually a part of a large coup that is about to happen in the north. The next day, Kwak informs Lee, the incumbent president, of the struggle for power in the north. However, Lee doesn't want to share the info with Kim, the elected president, saying that he will eventually find out. Back in the north, receives some equipment and money to prepare him for assassinating the last target. He is going to kill the last target during the grand opening of Chinese companies in the industrial city, Kaesong, as per the commander's plan. At night, he is eating with his family. His daughter loves G-Dragon and his music, but nags her as it is forbidden for them to enjoy the music and other South's products in the north. Then, he gives the money to his wife, and departs to Kaesong to finish his mission. He actually loves his family so much, but doesn't know how to show it as he is raised to be a stern military man. Then, he arrives in Kaesong and readies his weaponry. The next morning, the military arrives in the city. Meanwhile, Park, the last target, is paying his respect to the fallen comrade and commences the plan. A lot of North Korean personnel infiltrate the south through an underground tunnel. They disguise themselves as the South and steals a Steel Rain bomber. The commander is notified of the condition and that Park is actually safe in Pyongyang. Back in Kaesong, the crowd has gathered to welcome their great leader and the Chinese. Searches through the crowd, but cannot find Park, and only the great leader and the Chinese are present. He tries to notify the commander, but doesn't receive any signal there. Back in Pyongyang, Park's men kill the government officers and start the coup. Suddenly, the rocket launcher launches Steel Rain bomb, killing the crowds in Kaesong. The US sees this and destroys the launcher, but the North manages to launch another bomb to Kaesong, before being destroyed. Survives the first bomb, and is almost caught in the second one. He sees how the power-hungry Park kills his own people to be in charge. The damage is massive for both the North and the Chinese. In addition, Park's men come to kill the survivors and plan to blame the Americans for the incident. Luckily, the great leader survives and is saved by and 2 North girls. They put him into a Chinese company's car to infiltrate the south. However, the border is packed by the Chinese and the great leader bleeds badly. Luckily, the Chinese ambassador has called the North officers and they open the border gate. However, the place turns into a battlefield between the rebels and the officers, shortly after Park's men arrive. Meanwhile in the Blue House, the incumbent President Lee is welcoming the newly elected President Kim. Suddenly, the South's National Intelligence Service or the NIS director, Bin Jin, comes to notify the 2 presidents of the incident in Kaesong and that the US has demanded the nation to enter DEFCON 3, as the US are concerned that the North may declare war against the South due to the change of control. Kwak also enters to seek approval to open the border to the North, to let the surviving Chinese take shelter. Finally, and the girls can enter the South safely after the gate is opened. At night, they bring the great leader to a clinic to save him. However, the doctor is a gynecologist and cannot save him. Threatens her and she reluctantly treats the great leader's wound. She manages to save him with blood donation from the girls, but she can't take out a bullet near his brain. Then, calls the commander, and the commander says that he will send his men over. Then, the North comes to retrieve the great leader. However, they are the rebels and kills them with a scalpel. The other rebel also enters the room and gets into a fight with They fight on par for quite some time, but manages to break his neck. Then, and the others leave the clinic, with the surviving North on their tail. A bullet hits one of the girls who has been protecting the great leader, and she bleeds badly. Seeing the condition, the doctor calls her friend who is actually Quark's divorced wife. The wife tries to treat her, but they are already too late. Meanwhile, Quark is informed of the shootings near the border and remembers her divorced wife's gynecologist friend. He immediately goes to his wife's clinic. Takes Quark hostage and Quark confirms the great leader's condition. Quark reveals his identity and tries to negotiate with as both of them want to save the great leader to prevent the war between the North and South. Turns out, the North has declared a war against the US and the South, leading to a martial law in the South. After seeing this news, calls Commander, and Commander reveals that the act was done to prevent the frontline troops from coming back to Pyongyang. Then, the South's NIS come to save Quark. Accepts Quark's proposal as he is taken by the NIS. Back in the Blue House, the US is advising the South to declare war to prevent additional damage to the country. Turns out, the two presidents view the incident differently, as President Lee wants to attack the North, while the peace-loving President Kim wants to sign a peace treaty. Luckily, Quark manages to inform them of the great leader's condition before President Lee commences the war. From the North's possession, Quark finds the great leader's watch and sends it to digital forensics. Then, he is informed that the North might send representatives to talk peace. He visits who is in custody to dig more into the representatives. However, is experiencing drug withdrawal symptoms. Seeing this, Quark promises him to treat his addiction while in the South. Then, reveals that the North representative is most likely his commander and that they might come through tunnels that have been dug to the south. Hearing how close and Commander are, Quark wants to send him to the meeting, but Binjin declines the proposal. So, Quark and depart on their own mission to surveil the meeting and make sure that the peace meeting runs well. Along the way, Quark opens up to him and makes jokes to befriend The attempt is unwelcomed at first, but accepts him after seeing how kind the South are to the North defectors. After seeing change of heart, Quark undo his cuffs and works with him as a team. Along the way, talks about his daughter and her obsession towards G-Dragon, so Quark plays his music, sings and dances to it. Then, they observe the meeting from afar but cannot confirm Commander's presence. Suddenly, North rebels snipe and kill the representatives. The meeting is disbanded and the rebels chase the last surviving car. Manages to kill the rebels, but the car is also caught in the accident. Finds that the representative is actually Park and he immediately kills him to finish his mission. Suddenly, the snipers come back and saves Quark from the shot. Back in the Blue House, Quark tries to convince that the coup is over, but a recording of the meeting reveals that the commander is actually the one who started the coup and wants to kill Park as he holds the nuclear weapons. After some consideration, President Lee decides to launch a preemptive nuclear strike in Pyongyang. Meanwhile, a team of neurosurgeons are operating on the great leader. Quark is also informed that actually has stage 4 lung and pancreatic cancer, and is in constant extreme pain. He doesn't have the heart to tell him and asks him about his actions today instead. Suddenly, he is informed by the digital forensics that the great leader's watch is actually a nuclear code generator. Back in the North, Commander is mobilizing his men to take over Pyongyang. He takes over the military base and takes control over the nuclear detonator. However, he needs the great leader's code generator to launch the nuclear missile. Meanwhile, calls Commander to persuade him to retract the war declaration, but he is tasked to steal the code generator and give it to him. Hearing the response, faith in his commander starts to waver. Then, he reveals to Quark that the commander plans to set off a nuclear rocket as an EMP explosion to kill the South's communication. The North Special Forces will seize Seoul and force the US to negotiate in lifting the North's global sanctions. Meanwhile, the North infiltrates the hospital to kill the great leader and take the code generator. Simultaneously, the North pretends to retract the war declaration and attacks the Blue House with weaponized drones as a diversion. The NIS leaves the hospital unattended. With the infiltrators' help, the North managed to kill the remaining soldiers there and take over the hospital. Luckily, is present to confront the North. The gunfight runs for a prolonged time until their bullets run out. After some time, the North shoots at the great leader. Turns out, the body has been swapped and the NIS arrive to kill him. To stop the war, plans to bring the code generator with a tracker in it. He will deliver it to the commander and the South will bomb his location. Meanwhile, the US has launched 4 missiles, targeting major cities in the North. However, Commander has deployed some hackers to hack into the nuclear system, and they successfully hack into a missile. He launches the nuclear at Japan. Japan intercepts it and explodes the North's missile mid-air. The EMP from the explosion takes down the US missiles along, saving all of the countries. The South request another nuclear missiles to the US, but they won't do it, as the North threatens to bomb Japan, a close ally. Now that the South is on their own, they are totally scared of the North's nukes. So, they agree to Om's plan and Quark drives him to the tunnel. They spend their last time as friends. Before separating, thanks Quark for taking care of him while in the South. Enters the tunnel and is immediately taken to Commander. He takes Commander hostage and forces him to confess that he killed the great leader. Then, he reveals his location to the South. He tries to warn his comrades of the upcoming bomb, but they shoot him to death. With a heavy heart, Quark requests the missiles to be launched. Both of them say goodbye to one another as the missiles hit the bunker, killing and Commander. Some time later, President Kim is inaugurated and promises to establish peace between the two Koreas. Quark visits the North as the representative, and negotiates peace with the great leader as the South's bargaining chip. Then, he visits Om's family and delivers Om's gift for her daughter. In the end, the North agrees to send over half of their nuclear weapons to the South in exchange for their great leader, as a first step towards unified Korea. Subscribe to watch more videos like this, turn on notifications, and leave a like and comment to help the channel out. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.